Personas as trusted, knowledgeable hosts of porn stars and the damning revelations laid bare during the trial were too much for even them to withstand. For over a decade, the duo had built not just a business, but an empire of trust, curiosity, and American entrepreneurship, woven into the fabric of pop culture. Their TV presence was a mainstay for millions, a nostalgic window into artifacts of history, seasoned with negotiation, humor, and a sense of discovery. But beneath the surface of success lay a secret operation prosecutors would come to describe as one of the most sophisticated financial laundering schemes ever tied to entertainment personalities. At first, the allegations seemed like fiction, fueled by vague claims and public curiosity. But the courtroom drama revealed cold, hard facts: $15.7 million in laundered funds, entire networks of shell companies, and a 7-year campaign of financial deception, meticulously orchestrated from behind the counters of the iconic gold and silver pawn shop. What made the fall even more jarring was how meticulously Harrison and Russell had protected their public image. From heartfelt press conferences to interviews in which they proclaimed their commitment to fairness and transparency, they played the part of wrongfully accused businessmen to perfection. Their defense team clung tightly to the argument that any questionable financial activity had been conducted through professional advisors, implying the duo were perhaps negligent, but never malicious. But the prosecution countered with forensic precision: signed documents, shell companies registered with false addresses, communications instructing staff to restructure assets to avoid detection. The contrast between Harrison's composed on-screen demeanor and the trembling man in court was heartbreaking to watch. And Chumlee, long portrayed as a lovable, slightly bumbling foil to Harrison's stern expertise, now looked nothing like the comic relief fans had come to adore. As witness after witness chipped away at the story they had told the public, the defendants' expressions shifted from disbelief to desperation. The trial gripped the nation. Legal experts called it unprecedented, not just for the scale of the financial crimes, but because the defendants were icons of transparency in the public imagination. The courtroom was packed daily, not just with media and spectators, but with longtime fans clinging to hope that their beloved TV stars were innocent. They held signs. They wore merch. Some even traveled across the country to stand outside the courthouse. But facts are stubborn things. Prosecutors meticulously connected each financial maneuver to a calculated effort to hide illicit income, outlining a blueprint of deception that was hard to ignore: emails, transactions, corporate charts, FBI testimonies. The turning point came when a forensic accountant from Georgetown University laid out the costs associated with maintaining the shell corporations, millions of dollars spent purely to conceal. The defense faltered. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. Even the most loyal supporters watching from the gallery began to absorb the possibility that what they were witnessing was not a government overreach, but a reckoning. The final moments of the trial were soaked in tension. Judge Eleanor Blackwood, who had presided with stern impartiality, delivered the verdict with surgical clarity: guilty on all counts, maximum sentence, restitution, forfeiture of all assets. The room held its breath as the weight of the words sank in. The men who once haggled over Civil War rifles and vintage Rolex watches were now being sent to prison, possibly for the rest of their lives. Harrison and Russell, seated side by side at the defense table, didn't speak. They couldn't. The shock was too much. As Judge Blackwood concluded the reading, their bodies gave out, slumping forward in eerie unison. Gasps erupted. Security swarmed. Courtroom staff called for medics. The sight was surreal: 2 household names, unconscious in front of the nation. Their fall from grace broadcast not in a scripted finale, but in the stark reality of a federal courtroom. Their families, seated just rows away, looked frozen in disbelief. The courtroom, so tense just minutes before, was now chaotic with emotion. For the millions who had grown up watching porn stars, who had admired Harrison's sharp wit and Chumlee's humor, the scene felt like a betrayal of narrative, a gut punch to those who still believed in the American dream the show once symbolized. What remains now is a legacy forever changed. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a landmark of Las Vegas culture, is now a symbol of what happens when greed overtakes integrity. Harrison and Russell, once celebrated for turning history into entertainment, now serve as cautionary tales of how far one can fall when the truth finally catches up. Their fate will be studied, debated, and perhaps even fictionalized in the years to come. But the verdict is final. The curtain has fallen. And the stars of porn stars have faded, not in a blaze of glory, but in silence, inside a courtroom that showed no favor to fame. Collapsed under the weight of their conviction, unconscious in front of the very audience that once idolized them, the courtroom fell into chaos. Medical personnel were called immediately. As paramedics entered through the rear of the courtroom, pushing past reporters and onlookers who had crowded the exit trying to catch one last glimpse of the fallen stars, oxygen masks were applied, vital signs were checked, and after a few tense minutes, both Rick Harrison and Austin Russell, better known to the world as Chumlee, were stabilized and transported by ambulance to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the dramatic fall of two of reality television's most iconic figures to a stunned and divided public. Outside, crowds gathered as fans, critics, and curious onlookers waited anxiously, some still in disbelief, others vocal in their condemnation. News outlets scrambled to break the story, their headlines filled with phrases like "Porn star's empire crumbles," "Rick and Chumlee sentenced to life," and "From icons to inmates." Inside the hospital, both men regained consciousness within hours, though their emotional state remained fragile. According to sources close to the family, Harrison had to be sedated following repeated panic episodes, while Russell alternated between long stretches of silence and brief moments of weeping. Doctors later confirmed the collapse was caused by acute stress reactions, exacerbated by dehydration and lack of sleep, unsurprising given the intensity of the trial and the magnitude of the sentence. Their attorneys released a brief statement that evening thanking the medical staff and reiterating their plans to appeal. "Today's outcome is deeply disappointing," the statement read. "But this legal fight is far from over. We believe there are significant grounds for appeal, and we intend to pursue every legal avenue available." Millions were watching around the world, but the damage had already been done. The heroes of Porn Stars, those quirky, knowledgeable, and shrewd Las Vegas businessmen, were now convicted felons, their legacy forever marred by financial deceit. As the days passed, new layers of the case began to emerge, shocking even the most loyal fans. According to sealed documents released following the verdict, federal investigators had been building their case for nearly 6 years. What had begun as a routine financial audit of a shell company loosely connected to the gold and silver pawn shop quickly escalated when auditors noticed recurring transfers from offshore accounts in Belize and the Cayman Islands. These weren't isolated events. They were part of a sprawling web of entities, each serving a very specific function, some to shield assets, others to move funds discreetly, and a few explicitly created to obscure the final destination of laundered money. The web included dozens of limited liability companies, foreign trusts, and forged service contracts with vendors that did not exist. In total, over 40 shell companies were identified, with connections extending beyond the US into South America, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Federal agents from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, and the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division worked in tandem, often conducting undercover surveillance and issuing subpoenas under seal to avoid tipping off the targets. Testimony revealed that informants within the organization provided key information, including detailed ledgers and logging credentials to encrypted accounting systems. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from a disgruntled former employee who had been terminated in 2019. In an effort to negotiate leniency on unrelated charges, the individual handed over a hard drive containing years of internal communications, financial logs, and backup documents. Among them was a 67-page dossier titled Operational Risk Mitigation, believed to be authored by Russell, that outlined procedures for laundering funds, evading IRS scrutiny, and deflecting suspicion using charitable donations and public appearances. This document was presented during the final week of the trial, and it stunned the courtroom. Prosecutors read excerpts aloud. Stage 3. Cash influxes masked via antique acquisitions. Appraisal padding necessary for IRS undervaluation. Media coverage to divert attention from withdrawals. Every sentence seemed to contradict the public image the duo had maintained for over a decade. Perhaps most disturbing to fans was the realization that many of the show's on-screen transactions, the heartwarming discoveries, the friendly haggling, may have been orchestrated to provide cover for illegal financial flows. Some of the customers seen on camera were later revealed to be actors or associates involved in the broader scheme. The line between entertainment and deception had been completely erased. In the wake of the trial, the History Channel distanced itself swiftly. Within 48 hours of the sentencing, all episodes of Porn Stars were pulled from streaming platforms, and reruns were suspended indefinitely. An official statement from the network read, "The recent legal developments surrounding former cast members Rick Harrison and Austin Russell are deeply troubling. We are committed to upholding the highest standards of integrity and will be conducting a thorough review of our vetting procedures moving forward." Merchandise bearing their likeness was pulled from major retailers. Licensing agreements were terminated. Several collaborative partnerships, including a pending museum exhibit of historical artifacts from the show, were abruptly cancelled. Back in Las Vegas, the gold and silver pawn shop shuttered its doors, posting a handwritten sign that read, "Closed until further notice. Thank you for years of support." The store's official website went dark shortly after, replaced by a blank landing page with a government seizure notice. Property records indicated that federal authorities had seized not only the physical store but also 4 additional properties owned by Harrison and Russell, including luxury homes in Henderson and Summerlin. Vehicles, jewelry, and rare collectibles valued in the millions were also taken into custody. Fans hoping to visit the iconic location found the building surrounded by police tape, its windows covered in brown paper. The fallout reverberated beyond the immediate headlines and legal proceedings. Inside the sprawling world of reality television, networks held emergency meetings to reassess their vetting processes. Producers quietly combed through their active shows, looking for red flags they might have previously ignored. Casting directors, once focused solely on charisma and camera presence, were now consulting forensic accountants and compliance officers before signing talent. The Pawn Stars case had sent a chilling signal across the industry, a reminder that the smiling face behind a counter or the humorous quip caught on camera could be hiding layers of deceit. Talent management agencies rolled out new training programs, not in performance or public speaking, but in ethics and legal accountability. Media watchdogs began publishing exposés on the fragile moral foundations of many success stories broadcast to millions. What once passed as charming eccentricity now raised questions about integrity. In journalism schools, professors who had once taught Pawn Stars as a masterclass in approachable educational entertainment began redesigning their syllabi. The same clips used to illustrate American entrepreneurial spirit were now annotated with discussions on manipulation, hidden narratives, and the careful choreography of perceived authenticity. Meanwhile, in Washington, lawmakers seized on the public outrage. Committees were convened to discuss potential regulations targeting reality TV productions, particularly those that dealt with financial transactions or historical artifacts. A bipartisan bill was introduced aimed at increasing transparency in entertainment-based businesses, colloquially dubbed the Pawn Stars provision. Though its legislative fate remained uncertain, the political message was clear: the public trust could no longer be a mere performance, and fame would not be a shield against scrutiny. In Las Vegas, the city that had once embraced Harrison and Russell as hometown heroes found itself awkwardly untethered from their legacy. Billboards once plastered with their faces were hastily covered up or replaced. The gold and silver pawn shop silhouette, once featured in tourism campaigns and guidebooks, was quietly removed from brochures and visitor centers. Even local comedians, once fond of joking about Chumlee's antics or Rick's haggling prowess, stopped mentioning them altogether. It was no longer funny. It was too real, too tragic, too disappointing. Behind prison walls, the transformation of Rick Harrison and Austin Chumlee Russell was underway. Gone were the designer clothes, the expertly lit sets, the comforting routine of bantering with walk-in customers over quirky collectibles. In their place were jumpsuits, steel bunks, and institutional silence. According to correctional officers, Harrison remained withdrawn but composed, his days marked by long stretches of reading, legal correspondence, and solitary exercise. He reportedly declined participation in most group activities, preferring isolation over forced interaction. Some speculated that he was drafting a manuscript, others believed he was merely chronicling every detail of the downfall for a future legal battle or memoir. Russell's adaptation to prison life was notably more turbulent. Sources reported that he struggled with episodes of depression, emotional outbursts, and had even required temporary relocation to a psychiatric unit within the facility. Fellow inmates rarely engaged with him beyond superficial exchanges, a consequence of both his notoriety and his deteriorating mental health. The charisma that once made him a beloved figure now seemed like a mask he could no longer wear. What remained was a man unrecognizable to fans, stripped of the humorous persona and left with only the echo of his choices. Outside the prison, their families faced a different kind of sentence. Reporters camped outside the homes of relatives, eager to gather statements or snapshots of grief. Friends and acquaintances were inundated with interview requests. Those who once proudly identified as close to the stars now found themselves trapped between loyalty and shame. Some stayed silent, others offered vague messages of support or quietly distanced themselves altogether. In online forums and social media platforms, debates raged. Was it all a misunderstanding? Were Harrison and Russell victims of a system eager to make an example out of them? Or had they knowingly deceived millions while smiling for the camera? Hashtags like #FreeRick and #JusticeForChumlee trended briefly, bolstered by die-hard fans unwilling to believe the charges. But just as quickly, counter hashtags surfaced. #PornStars fraud and #trust betrayed, fueled by those who felt personally let down by the revelations. The entertainment industry, ever opportunistic, began plotting its next move. Several production companies expressed interest in adapting the saga into a limited series or docuseries, offering dramatic reenactments of the trial, interviews with insiders, and a behind-the-scenes look at the once-beloved show's hidden operations. Script treatment circulated through Hollywood, with some pitched as psychological thrillers and others as legal dramas. Streaming platforms reportedly engaged in bidding wars over exclusive rights to the courtroom footage and unseen archival content. Even disgraced employees began shopping tell-all books, hoping to capitalize on the public's insatiable curiosity. Publishers responded with caution. While the potential for profit was undeniable, the ethical implications of monetising a criminal downfall were equally apparent. Still, in the age of true crime fascination and blurred lines between reality and entertainment, the odds of a commercial adaptation seemed inevitable. Academics and cultural critics weighed in, analyzing the broader meaning of the collapse. They examined how media constructs narratives, how fame distorts self-perception, and how audiences project morality onto television personalities based on selective editing and likability. One article in The Atlantic dubbed it the porn stars paradox, dissecting how a show rooted in education and history ultimately became a vessel for illusion and deceit. Another essay in The New Yorker likened the courtroom finale to a modern Greek tragedy, flawed heroes undone not by external villains but by internal arrogance. College classes assigned papers on the ethical dimensions of parasocial relationships, asking students to evaluate why the betrayal felt so personal. Fans, they argued, hadn't just lost a show, they'd lost a piece of themselves, a comforting routine that once connected them to a sense of wonder and Americana. Back inside the federal facility, change came slowly. The initial media frenzy faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of bureaucratic routines and institutional indifference. Harrison's legal team continued filing motions, citing procedural errors and potential misconduct during the investigation. They argued that key witnesses had been improperly coached and that the introduction of the 67-page operational risk mitigation document constituted prejudicial overreach. Russell's lawyers pursued a different angle, emphasizing mental health concerns and appealing for compassionate reconsideration of sentencing. Both teams faced an uphill battle. Legal analysts noted that the volume of evidence, thousands of pages of financial records, incriminating emails, and witness testimony, made overturning the conviction unlikely. Still, appeals are a slow process, often taking years to resolve, and in that time, hope, however faint, persisted. As the months passed, the cultural impact of the scandal continued to evolve. Where once porn stars merchandise lined shelves in novelty stores and museum gift shops, now those same items were relegated to clearance bins or quietly removed altogether. Collectors debated whether the memorabilia had become worthless or, paradoxically, more valuable due to its infamy. On eBay and collector forums, autographed photos, shirts, and replicas of the pawn shop signage began fetching curious prices, purchased by buyers drawn less by admiration and more by the allure of scandal. The site of the gold and silver pawn shop remained shuttered, its once bustling storefront now weather-worn and eerily silent. Tourists still occasionally stopped by, snapping photos of the faded facade, as if trying to capture the ghost of a bygone cultural moment. Local artists turned the surrounding neighborhood into an unofficial gallery of commentary, spray-painting murals of broken clocks, fallen stars, and quotes from the trial. It became, in its own way, a pilgrimage site, not of nostalgia, but of caution. Meanwhile, other reality TV personalities took note. Quiet reforms began happening behind the scenes. Contracts grew longer and denser, filled with clauses addressing ethical conduct, legal compliance, and disclosure of financial interests. Media training programs began to incorporate ethics seminars. Some former reality stars even came forward with their own stories of pressure, manipulation, or illegal temptations, eager to distance themselves from the taint of scandal. Conferences on entertainment law now included panels specifically addressing the porn stars precedent. The incident had created a benchmark by which all future controversies would be measured, a reminder that fame without accountability was a liability waiting to detonate. And yet, amidst all the